If you're into hunting and processed venison before, I'm sure you've had, backstraps, made jerky, or ground it into burger meat, maybe made some sausage. But today we're gonna do things a little bit different with a venison in chili sauce. So this dish was inspired by a Diana Kennedy recipe for Conejo in Chile, which is basically just rabbit in chili sauce. And it can really be made with any cut of meat. Today I'm using venison shoulder because luckily enough my dad and brother both got deer this year and were luckily enough to share it with me. And deer shoulder is just like the shoulder from any other animal, though in general it's going to be a little bit leaner than things like beef or pork. For a cut of meat like this with plenty of connective tissue, braising is always a good bet. And I recently just did a braised shorter video, and even though the ingredients are quite different in this recipe, the techniques are really all the same. For that recipe, I used a classic mix of aromatic vegetables and red wine for braising. For this recipe, I'm using a variety of spices and garlic for the aromatics, with chili puree and a stock for my braising liquid. And even though this is my first time actually making this recipe, the power of braising is that it's really hard to mess it up. So let's sit back and hop into that recipe. So the first thing we gotta do, which I didn't realize I was gonna do, is actually break this shoulder down into two manageable pieces that can fit in our Dutch oven. So if you can see, I'm wiggling on the joint there, and I think it's the upper front leg and the shoulder blade that I'm separating, and I'm just looking for that joint and cutting to the joint. And then you can see I'm wiggling and looking to find it, and then just cutting through that joint. And I'm not sawing bones or anything, I'm just looking to follow the natural lines of the animal. And this is just kind of the same thing as if you were breaking down a chicken or turkey or something like that. So as you can see, we've got two nice pieces of meat separated out. On the left is that upper shoulder blade, and then on the right side is that upper leg. And then as with anything you are braising, you want to liberally add a bunch of salt and pepper on both sides. And you can do this ahead of time. You could do this overnight if you wanted to. Use plenty of salt, use plenty of pepper, and you'll be good to go. And then to facilitate browning in the oil, we're gonna use some all-purpose flour. Just give a light coating over both pieces of meat, all over it, and then that's gonna brown up really nice in the oil later on. But first, we have to prepare our aromatics and braising liquid. So we're gonna be making a classic chili puree out of pasilla chilies, which is a dried chilaca pepper, and an ancho chili, which is a dried poblano pepper. And all you have to do is just snip off the tops and then cut open into the insides. And we're gonna draw out all those seeds and membranes until they're clean on both sides. And this is gonna make them so much easier for us to just brown them, and you kind of discard some of like the stems and just the seeds, which don't really have any of that chili flavor in them. Now with all the dried peppers, we're just gonna get a cast iron over medium-high heat. Traditionally in Mexico, you would see a comal, but a cast iron works just as well. And just kind of press down on the peppers, and you wanna just toast them lightly. Be careful not to burn them. These will start to smell really fragrant, and it just really gets some extra toasty flavors. It starts to release those oils from the peppers and will provide more flavor than if you hadn't toasted them. And then to make this flavorful chili puree, it's as simple as getting out your blender. You're just gonna crush up all the dried chilies. Let them cool for like 5 to 10 minutes first. It should be nice and kind of crunchy when you toss them in there. And then for our liquid component, we're gonna add 500 grams of water and around 800 grams of tomatoes. These can be crushed, diced, whatever you had. I happen to have some fire roasted diced. And then we're gonna finish that out with a nice big sprinkle of salt. Then you're just gonna blend this whole thing up until it is this nice puree. With our puree done, we're gonna move on to this aromatic garlic paste. So you're gonna get out one of my favorite tools in the kitchen, the mortar and pestle. We're gonna toss in 4 to 5 garlic cloves and crush them up and just remove the skins off of them. With the skins removed, just add in a little bit of salt, and now you're going to mash these into a nice paste. Once that paste has formed, we're gonna go ahead and add in some cumin seeds, mash those up well. Then we're gonna come in with 2 bay leaves, mash those up. Finally, coming in with some dried oregano and some fresh thyme, and just mash this thing up into a paste. And I'm telling you, the flavors and smells from this are absolutely unbelievable. The last thing you gotta do before searing this is just finely chop up some onions. To sear our deer shoulder, all we're gonna do is put a nice layer of oil in a Dutch oven, bring this up over medium-high heat, and you're gonna sear both sides until they're nice and brown. This first one, I didn't have the heat high enough, so it's not that great, but you can see the other side was done much better. And then once these are brown, we're not cooking them through or anything, just throw them back onto the cutting board, and then we're gonna start cooking down our aromatics. Turn the heat down to medium-low, and we're just gonna drop in our sliced onions and that garlic paste. And you're just gonna wanna stir everything up, really try to scrape the bottom of the pan, let all those aromatics come to life for about 2 to 3 minutes, and then we're gonna pour in our chili puree. With the chili puree in, we're gonna come in with 500 milliliters of stock. This is just some goose stock that we had left over from Christmas, but any kind of stock will do. If your stock's frozen like mine, you gotta let it melt, and then we're just gonna bring our seared venison pieces back into the Dutch oven. They don't need to be completely covered. Then we're gonna put a lid on the Dutch oven, transfer this to a 300-degree Fahrenheit oven, and let this go for around 3 hours until that meat is just tenderly falling off the bone. After around 3 hours, this meat should just be super tender and juicy and falling off the bone. If you find it still a little bit tough, just put it back in the oven for another 30-45 minutes. I promise it'll get there. We're just gonna move this over to the cutting board, take out that bone, and this thing is just falling apart. Oh my gosh, just looking at this now gets me so excited. And then what I like to do is just shred this up with a fork. You could chop it with a knife if you wanted to. And then we're just gonna add everything back into that pot and let it stew up in those juices. And I'm telling you, the mixture of the meat and just the spices from the chili puree and those aromatics is absolutely heavenly. One option to serve this is just get a nice bowl, put in some white rice, give yourself a nice serving of that braised venison, top it with my favorite condiment in the world, pickled onions, and a little squeeze of lime, and you are in for a treat. So hopefully you guys enjoyed watching that video, and like I said, this doesn't have to be done with venison. Any kind of cut of meat, you can do chicken thighs, would work great too. Go make yourself a nice chili puree, get those dried chilies, and I promise you're gonna come up with something very delicious. That's gonna wrap it up for me. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. If you did, please drop me a like and subscribe, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.